Hello, and welcome to episode 13 of Talk Landscape. I'm Eden Flaherty, the multimedia editor at Think Landscape, and I'm going to be your host for today as we delve into regenerative agriculture. We'll be looking at what it is, how we might implement it, and what it means for the farmers that underpin the world's food systems. With me to explore these questions today are three amazing guests. We've got Catalina Mora, the Sustainable Agriculture Network Strategic Programs Manager, Ken Gunsalu, founder and co-CEO of NutriCare Malawi, and Philippe Birker, the co-founder of Climate Farmers. Welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Good to be here.
Looking forward to it. It's good to be here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. So to get started, regenerative agriculture is a somewhat flexible definition and has various definitions depending on who you ask. So I think to begin with, we'll start with what is regenerative agriculture to you? Catalina, do you mind starting us with that? I think your microphone.
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay.
So I think for me, regenerative agriculture is an approach to farming that goes a step beyond what we traditionally understood as sustainable agriculture. So when we talk about sustainability, of course, we were talking about maintaining a system over time and reducing negative impacts. But in this case, regenerative agriculture, as the name suggests, is about actively restoring and regenerating the productive system. So I think the biggest shift is that is less bad is not good enough any longer. So we need agricultural systems that actively rebuild soil health, improve water cycles, increase biodiversity. And this is the reason why this has become so important in the discourse now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Philip, what do you think?
I think more than what I think, what our farmers defined as regenerative agriculture is agriculture that increases the life-holding capacity of its place. So it builds life instead of destroying life. And I would also agree, like it's definitely about not only doing less harm, but actually doing good. And I think one other important separating factor for me is that it's outcome-based. So for me, a farm cannot declare itself regenerative unless it can show that regeneration has taken place. So where organic, for example, mostly looks at that you don't use, for example, chemical inputs, but it doesn't actually look at the context of the farm and what actually happens at the farm. For us, regenerative agriculture really is about also measuring regeneration that is taking place. So that means increased soil water storage capacity, increase in biodiversity, increase in soil health, and many other indicators.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ken, I'm actually going to ask you a slightly different question, which is why is regenerative agriculture or sustainable farming more generally important? I know you work a lot with like nutritional solutions, so why would we want a regenerative system from this perspective?
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here and to have this global conversation. To me, this is so important to practice regenerative agriculture right now in Africa or as well as globally. This is because regenerative agriculture tackles three challenges. The first challenge is of climate change. Nowadays, we are having challenges with lots of floods, drought changes, and unpredictable weather patterns, which are affecting our agriculture productivity. That is the first challenge. The second challenge that we're facing is about a poor production because of degradation of our soils in the farm. And these two, they are causing the third challenge, which is about malnutrition and poor diet in the communities. So the first two challenges are causing the third challenge. But then regenerative agriculture, when it's practiced well, is solving all these three across the sector. For example, in the past or previous years, we used to make sure that agriculture is only maximizing production on the land. But now, regenerative agriculture is no longer looking at that. Sometimes when you are producing to maximize production, we do it at the expense of biodiversity, at the expense of soil health, at the expense as well as of the ecosystem in the field. But then regenerative agriculture is coming as a solution to these challenges by making sure that we restore the natural resources that we have. We make sure that we produce enough for the now and also make sure that the resources can capture the future generation. So looking at the way the system is working, it is also improving the livelihood of the local farmers by increasing income to the farmers after selling the harvest. So looking at regenerative agriculture, to me, it's important to have it now and being practiced in the field because it's combating the challenges that I've just mentioned now. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, it sounds like a good thing to move towards. It sounds like a positive step, which then, raises the question: how do we take that step? Catalina, what are some of the ways that we can move from our current system towards these regenerative agricultural practices, and what are some of the biggest hurdles for us to get there?
I think I'm going to start with the challenging one, which is what are the biggest hurdles? And I think when we talk about regenerative agriculture, it's essential for us to acknowledge that the transitioning to more regenerative practices in our productive system has a cost. And that farmers, producers, and especially those that are smallholders, they cannot be expected to absorb that cost alone. So whether we're talking about cover crops, agroforestry, improved nutrient management, of biodiversity restoration, many of the investments that happen today will have benefits only become visible years later. So during those periods, we will need farmers, producers to take on additional costs, uncertainty, and risk. So if we genuinely want regenerative agriculture to scale, we will need to provide access not only to technical assistance, which many of us are already doing, but access to financing, the appropriate inputs, practical support mechanisms that allow producers to transition without putting their livelihoods at risk.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's already actually taking us on to kind of the crux of what this episode is about, which is who's going to pay for regenerative agriculture? How are we going to actually get there in terms of finance? Before I ask the next question, I will just remind the audience watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or on our website that it would be great for you to be part of the conversation. And if you have any questions for any of our panelists today, or if you have any comments, just drop them in the chat and we'll be able to come to those towards the end of the episode. Coming back to the question of finance, Philippe, where will the money come from to make this transition? Where do you think the money will come from, or where could it come from?
I mean, it's a complex question, and I think it has to come from a variety of different streams, right? I think the problem that we have seen in the last 5-6 years is that I think most farmers, at least in the European context, want to transition towards more regenerative practices and are focused on really having a farm that is also farmable for the next generation. I know very little farmers, for example, that like to use agrochemical inputs, but they have to, because at the current situation, they only get paid for the produce, right? And they only get paid for yield. They don't get really paid for the quality of the produce, and they don't get paid for what we call ecosystem services, which are side effects of regenerative agriculture. We do see this slowly shifting. I mean, the cap is currently being discussed in Europe. So in Europe, you have subsidies being very often around half of the income of farmers. The last subsidies were 440 billion euros given out over 7 years. And they were mostly focused on size of farm and yield of the farm. So subsidies that very much favor the agrochemical industry. Not very surprising with the amount of lobbyists that they have running around in Brussels. But now we are currently moving towards a more decentralized system. So the different member states will have more autonomy in giving out this money. And here we see some opportunities. In the Netherlands, for example, we have now 165 million going towards transitioning 1,000 farms to regenerative agriculture, which can then serve as model farms, basically, to show that Regen Ag does not only benefit the planet, but that it also leads to, due to higher resilience, more profit for farmers. And then something that we are, for example, exploring, which is a little bit out of the box, is stacking of businesses and additional revenue streams for region farmers, simply due to the fact that those farms are really beautiful. And so it's actually quite nice to visit them. So, for example, agritourism is something that a lot of our farmers are doing, so that they get more people to come out on the farms again, and through this have more different revenue streams. Because very often that is the problem, that through the produce alone and through payment for ecosystem services, schemes such as for example, carbon credits are not yet able to cover the costs of the transition. So we need to work with a variety of different mechanisms to get us there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Ken, I'll just ask you the same question. How do you see us financing this transition to more sustainable agriculture, or specifically regenerative agriculture? I think your microphone may not be on or muted. I'm not able to hear you. Okay, just while we sort that out, Philip, I might just flip back to you for something that you said there, which is about a farmer's income is capped by what they can sell their goods for. How can we increase that amount of money that they're getting paid for those goods? There's something referred to as a green premium. We've seen that a lot with like organic produce. Will consumers pay more for produce produced under regenerative agricultural systems, or how can we increase the demand for regenerative products?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Like, I don't see the large scale commodity market really stepping in there. I do see a lot of our farmers that are able to do direct selling. For example, if you do dairy production or you do meat production, then I think consumers really value having a story and a face connected to their food. So then it's possible to get a premium price. Like some of our region dairy farmers are getting €1 to €1.50 for their milk, whereas on the commodity market you would get 30 cents to 35 cents. So this is a possibility for some farmers, but if you're producing corn or you're producing wheat or barley, it's a little more difficult because very few consumers are buying barley for their personal home consumption. So it depends a little bit on the cropping type. I would love for the commodity market to pay a premium for regenerative, but the feedback that we're getting from a lot of the food corporates is that they are struggling. So a lot of the budgets have been cut in the last 2-3 years. CSR departments are also being cut, right? Like climate change is definitely happening, but it's not the hot topic anymore, right? Like with America negatively leading the way, we unfortunately are not seeing the direction of more people investing and more companies investing into climate change, rather vice versa. So that's why I'm a little skeptical about that happening anytime soon. And we're much more focused right now on farm resilience and also higher profitability due to more crop resilience to climate change effects rather than premium prices, even though I would love to see it. And I think there's some fascinating studies already on nutrient density and the fact that more nutrient dense food is also healthier for you, right? We have skyrocketing cancer rates, at least in Europe. We have skyrocketing Alzheimer rates. This is all related to the chemicals we spray on our food. But but I don't see this really entering the mass markets yet. Hopefully changing soon, but not the trend that I'm unfortunately observing.
Catalina, is it a trend that you're seeing? Are you seeing, people getting a premium for these goods, or people willing to pay a premium for these goods?
Well, to some extent, yes. I think consumers are increasingly aware of the environmental and social impacts associated with the products that they buy, and many of them are willing to support more sustainable production systems and now regenerative. However, I have a strong opinion of this because I don't believe that we can realistically expect consumers alone to finance the transition through premiums or higher prices. First, because, not everybody can afford to pay more. And second, because regenerative agriculture needs to become the norm, not a niche product reserved for a small segment of the market. So in here, my strong opinion is that the largest responsibility of paying for the transition will lie with the companies that actually have built successful businesses from agricultural supply chains. And I'm not saying this only because they generally have greater financial capacities because of their profits, but because investing in regenerative agriculture right now is fundamentally in their own interest. So if soils degrade, water becomes scarcer, climate impacts intensify, their supply chains becomes more vulnerable, more expensive, less reliable. So when we're looking at regenerative agriculture, actually we have to think about how we view it less as a philanthropy or environmental agenda and more as a strategic investment in securing the future of the supply and also managing the business risk.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ken, are you back with us on the microphone?
I think so. Am I loud and clear?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Great. I know that, Ken, you actually work with produce, you work with nutrition. What do you think about, a premium cost for regenerative products? And what do you think about the financing of regenerative agriculture generally?
Oh, thank you so much. I think in terms of financing, I see regenerative agriculture not to be funded by a single stakeholder. It's a thing of multiple roles played by multiple stakeholders. For example, government has its own role to play. For example, for private and mostly public infrastructures, access to roads, good market infrastructures. These are supposed to be done by the government. And also the government has a role to have and produce or approve policies that are good for regenerative agriculture. But also the private sector has also a role to play into paying these prices as well. They have to be responsible in terms of sourcing the raw materials. They have to source from people or farmers which are producing using regenerative activities or means of producing it. But also the developmental cooperative industry has also a role to play for funding, catalyzing funding in this transition process of regenerative agriculture. But also financing institutions have also a part to play. They have to make sure they have financing products that are risk-free to the farmers who are practicing regenerative agriculture. In terms of premium prices, nowadays, most consumers are aware of paying for products which are going through regenerative agriculture production activities. Mostly when a consumer is aware why the product is important to their own health, when the consumer is aware how the product is produced in order to make sure that the environment or the planet is also conserved, when the consumer is aware on how the product has influenced or positively impacted the community where it is coming from, is willing to pay for the premium prices, considering these cost benefits behind the regenerative production. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've talked about the shift and how that's going to be financed. There's also going to be a cost for the farmers, not just a financial cost, but a cost in maybe that shifting culture, shifting practices. Each of you actually comes from various different regions. Catalina, I know you're based in Central America, Philip in Europe, and Ken, you're in Malawi. It would be really interesting to hear what these changing practices or what a shift to regenerative practices is going to demand of farmers in each of those regions where you work. Catalina, would you like to start with that?
Yes, definitely. So I think, well, I also come from, an NGO background, and I think as practitioners, and sometimes when we talk about even our corporate partners, we underestimate how much we will be asking of producers to do when we talk about sustainability regeneration in general. So when we go to the details of regenerative agriculture, we are often asking them to change practices that may have been used for decades. Agriculture is something that is very customary, and in many of our countries are passed from generation to generation. So we're asking them not only to change, but to learn new skills, collect more information. And this is very important because, at the beginning of this session, specifically, Philippe said, well, we cannot call it regenerative, we cannot measure the outcome. So we're now asking them also to become collectors of information. We are asking them to take on additional labor, sometimes invest in new equipment, invest in new inputs, and then also to accept uncertainty while waiting for results that may take years to materialize. So when we talk about large commercial farms, This is challenging by itself and can put profitability at risk. But when we talk, for example, of the Latin American and Central American context, we're mostly talking about smallholder farmers. So it's not simply a question of profitability or return on investments or capacity of investment. It's about also making it to the end of the month for our smallholder farmers. So it's deciding on whether I invest in the change to regeneration or I invest in paying school fees or put food on my table or manage risks that directly affect the well-being of their families. So I think for me, this is why when we talk about regenerative agriculture, both as practitioners, as farmers, as funders, we have to talk about it a little bit more of a partnership. It's not an expectation. So when we are talking about what needs to change in terms of smallholders, we need to acknowledge that is requesting a lot of input from their side. So we will need to supply from different stakeholders the support resources and incentives, very important, necessary so that they make the transition successfully without putting their livelihoods at risk.
Fantastic, thank you, Philip. How about in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with Katarina. Like, I think there's very often expectations towards farmers, but without giving them the support that they need. And I think one thing that we see in Europe very much is age being a major factor in the transition, because if we talk, like, the average age of farmers in Europe is in their late 50s, and in my experience, if you speak with someone that has been doing agriculture for 30 years, has learned at university how to do conventional industrial agriculture, how to spray, how to plow, etc., to then tell them that what they have been doing might not have been the best way of doing farming, there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance, and people don't really want to acknowledge that maybe they've done something wrong for 30 years of their life. So we are very much pivoting at the moment towards really focusing on younger farmers, and especially the next generation of farmers, which very often see also their parents struggle, and they want a different life and they want to do things differently. So what we see is that there's a real community forming around these younger farmers that are then supporting each other in that transition. And I think that is one of the key aspects, that you have this community of practice and this support network, that you're not feeling you're alone and you are the crazy ones, which was 5-6 years ago. Many of the farmers that we knew were doing it were almost mocked by their conventional neighbors, like, why are you moving your cows on a daily basis? And why is your field so messy? What are those trees doing on your arable field? But now we have these example farmers already. They can already show the data. So we definitely are seeing a shift there in awareness and mindset, because we have some successful role models where other farmers are going, that farm does feel a lot nicer, and you can walk on the regenerative farms and you can hear the birds and you can see the insects. And a lot of people and also farmers are able to realize that this might be a nicer context to work in than a conventional industrial farm where life is essentially not existent. So we see a change, but the support network that farmers really need is definitely not there yet.
Yet being a key word at the end of that, I think, or hope. Ken, I'm going to ask you the same question. Before I do, just a reminder to everyone watching that we will have Q&As in a short while. So please do drop any questions or comments you have into the chat, and we'll be able to get to those shortly. So Ken, what's your experience with this? What's your experience with the impact on farmers with these shifting practices?
Thank you so much. This is a very important question in regenerative agriculture. Most of the times when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we focus much on how it is benefiting the planet, forgetting the one who will be practicing, who is the farmer, forgetting the burden that the farmer will experience along the transition processes. So we have to understand that each change brings something which is supposed to distract or contribute positively. So most of the technologies that are coming with regenerative agriculture require much of the labor to the farmer. For example, if you are saying zero tillage, or we should cover the soil with some crop residues, that means the farmer has to increase his time of labor to cover that land. Or also some other interventions of regenerative agriculture require a learning curve, which might require a farmer invest more time in order to understand the technology as well. So we also have to see that the farmer, some other interventions of regenerative agriculture can also be costly to him or her, with some maybe trade-off arms which is supposed to invest some financial risks in it. So it's not only about understanding how it is improving the soil health or the planet. We also have to understand that it comes with a burden to the farmer who will be practicing regenerative agriculture. To make it short, we have to make sure that regenerative agriculture is a gradual process of transformation. So this gradual process of transformation, it needs some investments to the farmer. Not only technological investment, but we have to start with knowledge investment to the farmer, training investment to the farmer, in order to understand the technology. We also have to go down into the ground on the field, demonstrate practical genetic examples of agriculture on the ground to let know that farmers, this can also happen in their locality situations. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, thank you. And it was really interesting to hear what you just touched on then, which is that oftentimes when we talk about regenerative agriculture or more responsible agriculture, we think about the impact on nature and often forget the impact on people. And agriculture globally is a sector that has still got a lot of issues around labor rights and around human rights. So Catalina, perhaps you can start. How can we include considerations of labor rights and human rights of agricultural workers in the transition to regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, that's very important. I actually think in here we cannot talk about regenerative agriculture if we don't have at the center of it the farmers, whether they're industrial farmers, but also and especially if we're talking about smallholder farmers. So from the work that we have been doing as an, I think the starting point is a very simple principle, which is do no harm. Easier said than done. But before we ask farmers, workers, communities to change practices, we also assess whether those changes could unintentionally increase, for example, workloads or reduce incomes, exclude certain groups, or shift costs onto those least able to absorb them. So it's important for us when looking at regenerative agricultural strategies to also ask who benefits, who bears the cost, and who may be left behind because of what we're doing. And because of this, um, we may need to make sure that like the safe and dignified working conditions are there. There are meaningful opportunities for women and youth, and then this transition means that we're not relying on unpaid labor or invisible labor. So I think I said it before, but I ultimately do not see why we should look at regenerative agriculture only as an environmental or ecological agenda. And in this case, when we talk about regeneration, we need to talk about also human rights. There are things that are closely related together. A farming system cannot be truly regenerative if it's restore biodiversity or the soil while failing to provide decent livelihoods and equitable opportunities. So I think when we talk about regenerative landscapes, supply chains, or system, we require both healthy ecosystems but also thriving communities, both local communities that are there, but also the communities of farmers, the communities of farm workers. So it's important that we look at it from a system approach and not only from the ecological or environmental point of view.
Brilliant. Cheers. Philip, what do you think about that?
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, for us, if we verify a farm as regenerative, we always look at economic, ecological, and social regeneration. So the ecological is kind of the classic one with like the soil health, the biodiversity, the soil water storage capacity. But then we also feel a farm that's not actively making money is also for us not a regenerative farm. If you're just pumping money from somewhere else into it, that's not running a farm in an economical regenerative way. And then the same thing is with farmer stress levels and worker rights. But this is one of the most amazing things that we have been observing over the last 4 years, that operating in a regenerative system where you see nature around you thriving is actually having a majorly positive effect on farmer and farm worker well-being, which makes a lot of sense, because again, being on a regenerative farm, hearing the birds around you, hearing insects around you, seeing the fields flowering is something that's very good for your own well-being, and that's just an enjoyable working environment. And so we actually see the well-being scores of farmers and farm workers going up in more regenerative systems.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, people are often going out into nature to try to restore themselves, so it makes sense that that would be a better working environment. Ken, I know that you already mentioned the importance of including people in the transition, but is there anything else you'd like to add about that?
Yeah, of course, practicing regenerative agriculture, we are not truly practicing regenerative agriculture if we are not producing regenerative social justice to the communities that we are serving. I'm trying to say that regenerative just social justice, these are things that include that if regenerative creating green jobs, you must make sure that these green jobs are accessible to both women and youth. We must also make sure that the environment that these women and youth are working is also safe for them to be a conducive environment to work. This is also supposed to be considering as we are practicing social justice. I often say that regenerative agriculture is a system of farming that's supposed to give back more than it takes to the community and to the soil as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I think what we'll do is move on to some questions that have come in. A reminder for everybody watching that there is still time to drop any questions or comments into the chat, and we'll try and get to those. But we have one here which is quite relevant to something you just said, Ken, which is, how can we make sure that global finance mechanisms actually reach farmers, especially women and youth on the ground? Catalina, do you want to start with that? So how can we ensure that global financing reaches farmers on the ground?
Yes, well, I think in this case, we as practitioners, and I'm talking specifically about the NGOs, but I think that in here we have a bigger role to play. And I think this is also about efficiency on the use. We have to be, as development organizations, and I'm not talking only about NGOs here. I'm gonna talk about, cooperation agencies, NGOs, governments. I think we have to take a very introspective look into our operations, and I'm going to be highly critical of our own sector. Is we need to ensure that whenever we're designing these systems, we're not taking the majority of the funding to support our own capacities, but we make sure that the efficiency of the funding is there and that the majority of the funds are passing to this. I think, as I said before, there's also some work that we need to do into working with our corporate partners and finance institutions into understanding that regenerative agriculture is not just altruistic or nice or tree hugging agenda. This is about risk. This is about managing risk. This is about securing the future of our food systems. This is about securing the future of the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the water we have, the resources in general. So there's two sections of it, and first is the capacity building that we have to offer to producers, of course, but there also needs to be a lot of efforts put into um, helping the other sector, like the sector that can be paying for this, so finance and corporate, into understanding why this is important and then helping them build their business case for it internally so that we support. And then I'm gonna specifically talk about women and youth because what we see is that disproportionately women and youth suffer the effects of resources degradation and climate change. Women in this case, it relates a lot of the care tasks that they have assigned as a role in the society. But I think it's important to recognize also that sometimes when we talk about financial systems, those may be linked to the ownership of the land. So we need to shift what we understand as a farmer, it cannot only be like the person that is in the registry, the legal registry. So it's important for us that when we build these systems, to make sure that it reaches women and youth, we're not only taking a very legal approach at it, but we are more flexible and we're more creative in finding ways in which we can support people who have been traditionally left behind, because the system for years and years have not been able to recognize ownership or the way in which they work along with the male or older generations.
Fantastic. Thank you. Philip or Ken, do either of you have anything to add?
I mean, in the European context, I would say development work is not such a necessity, right? Like it's a very different context than the one that Catalina and Ken are operating in. But what I can definitely say is that we see youth and women leading the transition to region ag. So I think traditionally in Europe, we have about 20% of farmers being female. In region ag, it's closer to 40 or 50%. So I don't know what exactly the reason is for that, but we see a lot of, especially daughters of farmers taking over the farms and moving them towards regenerative agriculture. So this is a massive trend that we're seeing. And then the other one is generally when farms get handed over to the next generation, that then the transition is happening. So in the European context, I would say women and young people are actually the ones which are leading the transition towards regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues who have spoken before that it's really the youth and the women who are practicing regenerative agriculture, but to make sure that resources or funding are reaching the intended people on the ground, it is important that in our allocation of regenerative technologies to the communities, those community members on the ground should participate in the decision of making in selection of that technology towards that community. Those people on the ground, they have indigenous knowledge, which we can learn from them. And if we can incorporate that indigenous knowledge to the regenerative practices, it will be easy for them to accept and also to make sure that resources are trickled exactly to what is required to the community. In this approach, where communities are taking part in deciding what's supposed to be invested on in their community, it will make sure that resources or funding are utilized on the local level or to the intended beneficiaries on the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have a few more comments. This isn't a question so much as a comment, but I think it's an interesting point about hoping that organizations, women and youth on the ground can access finance more easily. How do you think that we'd be able to facilitate this? How can we ensure that farmers trying to transition to regenerative agriculture can access finance more easily? I don't know if any of you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, Ken, do you want to go first, and then Catalina?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. We can only achieve that when farmers are organized. When farmers are organized, it's easy to make sure that the technologies are practiced on the ground. If farmers are operating in isolation, it's hard to make sure that the transition is visible on the ground. So I encourage and I mostly work with farmers that are organized, or I work to organize them in order to access these financial resources as a group, not as individuals. It's more risk-free when you work with a group, because you can ensure each individual as a surety to the other than working with individuals in order to adopt or practice these regenerative agricultures. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Catalina?
Yeah, well, similarly to what Ken is saying about, organizing farmers, my point is about organizing everybody else as well. I think the size of the challenge that we're facing, not only in terms of environmental biodiversity challenges, but also of making this finance accessible to all, the size of it is not something that any of us can solve alone. So I think in here, I would like to refer to something that at SAM we call radical collaboration, which is this willingness to work across sectors, organizations, and interests. and what gives me confidence is that we already know many of the solutions. So the question here is not whether we can change, but the question is how are we willing to take responsibility for the part of the system that each of us can influence, and how do we bring all the other sectors together. So it's just making sure that we organize in the way in which we act. So us NGOs, with the farmer associations, with financial sector, with cooperation agencies. So instead of duplicating our work and sometimes predating each other, we work together towards common goals and make sure that resources are better distributed.
Brilliant, thank you. I know that some of the people in our audience will be working in agriculture, will be working in food systems, but many will not be. How can people not, directly working in food systems, or maybe perhaps just consumers, support the transition to regenerative agriculture? Philip, let's start with you as the other two jumped in the other one.
I mean, I would say the easiest and most important thing you can do is to pay attention where your food is coming from. I think it's for all of us. It's always the most convenient option to go to the supermarket, but it's the worst thing to do, right? Like supermarkets in general, if a produce gets sold in the supermarket, then it's almost a guarantee that the farmers is going to get the lowest cut of that, right? Like looking at milk as a good example again, the farmer gets 30 cents a liter, and then someone else packages it, puts it on the shelf, and in Europe you pay €1.50 for that, which is ridiculous because basically 90% of the job has been done on the farm, right? It's basically been done by the cow, and then it's about milking the cow and putting it in a package, and that's it. And so what you can always do is you can take a look at who are regenerative farms in your area. How can you source directly from them? In Europe, we have community-supported agriculture, CSAs, coming up a lot, where you basically take the risk off the shoulders of the farmer by saying, hey, I take a certain percentage of your harvest every week, whatever that harvest is. So the farmer is not so much at risk due to weather events, and he can plan with the year because he can pre-sell his harvest and he already knows this is the amount of money that I will have and that I can manage. And this is a great opportunity. And you also get to experience what is fresh, what is in season at the moment. You get local produce, and you also get a connection to where your food is coming from. And I think if everybody would start rebuilding that connection and also re-honoring farmers again as a staple pillar of society and paying them the attention and the respect that they deserve, then we would already be a big step towards a more regenerative food system.
Brilliant, thank you. Catalina, what do you think?
Yeah, I want to address the other side because I think, as I said before, some consumers have a choice and they will be able to, decide what to consume. Some others, especially when we're talking about developing economies, it will be a little bit more challenging and it will be about affordability. So in these cases, I do agree with Philip that one of the things that we can do is also a shifting mindset, for example, in terms of supporting local products. I think sometimes those tend also to be more affordable. I think in a globalized world, of course, we have been now socialized to also seek for products that are imported and everything, but we also have the capacity to support our local farms. And I actually see this happening a lot in many Central American economies where, we used to shop everything at supermarkets and we're going back to farmer markets and local produce and things that are very common on our countries rather than everything that is imported. So it's a little bit of a mindset change, but I also think that it's important for us to recognize that not everybody has the choice. So what I would say to a person or a consumer that doesn't have the choice to choose what to buy because of affordability, I think the best thing is still to keep informed. I think there are many resources available that you can do, and I think even little by little we can also do our part. And one of the other things that we can, all do from the places that we sit is also put pressure on our society, our governments, and our regulations. So not only that food becomes more affordable, but also there are elements in place and incentives in place so the farmers can produce better while this doesn't become an economic burden for consumers.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, Ken, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's very true. all we need to do for this transition to be accepted by the community is to increase the awareness campaign. But people, we are in the generation of knowledge generation, where we can access knowledge everywhere. When a farmer or a consumer is aware of what is benefiting when he's eating something, he's also conscious of his buying. Nowadays, we have nutritious conscious consumers. We also have environmental conscious consumers, of which before they buy, they think twice how it is improving the environment, how it is improving their health, how it is improving their community as well. So this is done because the consumer is aware. So increasing awareness, it will help that most choices of the consumers should be done concise. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that brings us towards the end. I'm just going to now hand over to each of you for a minute and a half, 2 minutes to give some final words, just to speak about anything we didn't cover so far that you think needs to be said, or recommendations for people who are watching and listening and want to learn more about this topic and explore a little further. Catalina, would you like to go first?
Yes, sure. So I think from my side that we have discussed today, of course, the challenges that are facing agriculture and how these are not theoretical, but the realities that farmers, companies, governments, and even us as consumers around the world are dealing with every day. So I want to repeat onto something that I said before, and is that let's recognize that this challenge is bigger than each of us individually, so that we can, be more open to collaborate and find ways in which we can work together, because together we can definitely address this. So my invitation to the audience, if you're a farmer, keep experimenting, learning, and sharing what works for you. If you're a company, recognize that you need to invest in your supply chains and in the people who make them possible. If you're a policymaker hearing us today, keep working to create the conditions that make the right decisions easier and more rewarding for farmers and for consumers. And especially, I want to talk to the practitioners or researchers that are here. Continue generating the evidence, the tools, the support that helps others act, and please share it loudly, share it widely. And finally, if you're a consumer with a capacity to choose, recognize that every purchasing decision you make shapes the kind of productive systems that we build. So, just to close it up from my side, I think the challenge is significant, but so is our collective capacity to address it when we work together. And ultimately, the future of agriculture will not be determined by the people who care the most about regeneration. It will be determined by the people who make decisions every day about what to buy, what to grow, what to invest, what to regulate, what to reward. Because regenerative agriculture will not be built by a single actor, but it will be built by all of us together at the same time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Ken, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'd say to the listeners and also to everyone who is participating in this regenerative agriculture, they should know that regenerative agriculture is not only regenerating the soil or health. Regenerative agriculture, when being practiced well, is supposed to regenerate nutrition. It's supposed to regenerate livelihood. It's supposed to regenerate the community. When I say regenerating nutrition, I mean that regenerative practices encourages crop diversification, increasing crop ranges in the community, increases food diversity. So increasing food diversity in the community, this increases nutrition in the community. Regenerative agriculture is supposed to increase livelihood of the people. When soil is in good health, it produces fruits that are also nutritious. It produces heavy or bumpy harvest, which increase in production. It automatically makes sure that it will increase in sales of the produce for the farmer. So increase income is also increasing livelihood of the farmer. So regenerative agriculture is supposed to improve as well as livelihood of the people. And as well, it's supposed to improve the community as well at large. For example, when you are practicing regenerative practices such as agroforestry or reforestation, we make sure that the soil or the land is covered. That means we are reducing prone to floods or droughts or different weather patterns. So that means we have developed a food system which is resilient to climate change. In my conclusion, I always say, let's practice regenerative agriculture. To my own ways, regenerative agriculture, I do say that it's the practice of farming that gives back to the community, gives back to the planet, gives back to human health more than what it takes from the soil. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And finally, over to you, Philippe.
I would keep it very simple. I would say do yourself a favor and visit a regenerative farm in the next 3 months. Because I think we can talk a lot about it, but it's nothing, again, until you have seen the magic with your own words. Visit a farmer, maybe stay the night there, buy the produce from him, and just say thank you to him and give him some appreciation and love. And that's the best thing that you can do for yourself and for the planet.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you to all three of you for joining today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I will ask you to just please stay on the call for 1 second while I just say thank you very much to our entire audience as well. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for contributing in the chat. If you want to make sure to never miss an episode of Talk Landscape, please subscribe to the newsletters. The link will be in the chat, and then you'll get notified every time we put them out. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.